All right, welcome everyone to Community Conversations. I'm Cherry Rowe, the Chief Program Officer for Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Dallas, and we have a great topic that we are talking about today. Remember, here at Community Conversations, we talk about the things that are important in the DFW area. And today we're going to talk about mental health issues and learning differences in kids and how you can gain access to those things. But before we get started, make sure you follow Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Dallas on all of our social channels and stay abreast of all the things we have going on with the Community Conversations. Now, let's talk to this great panel of people. They are absolutely amazing, and I'm just so excited to have you both here. I think this is going to be a really good conversation. They have a lot of valuable insight to provide on these topics. First up, we have Erica Taylor, who's the owner and lead therapist at Taylor Made Consulting Services, and she's been doing that for 13 years. Her team, they offer an innovative approach to counseling in a variety of modalities, and they provide a convenient treatment option that's affordable for every budget, which is really, really important. And she and I we were talking earlier, and the options are virtual as well. So if people can't get out to an office, they can work with you directly. Her background is she's a licensed clinical social worker with a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Texas at Arlington. Her areas of expertise are anxiety and depression, relationship challenges, family conflict, and phases of life changes. And I like that she said that she believes that change happens when people are given the insight that they need to draw on their own strengths and realize their potential to live fulfilling, happy lives. So thank you, Erica, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Julie Jennings, who is the managing director at Capella's Partners. And Julie is a longtime volunteer with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Dallas. She has 20 years experience in advertising and retail. With an extensive agency background, her depth of knowledge around traditional, digital, and social marketing, as well as public relations, business to business, and retail sales, she's using a lot of that to help us here at Boys and Girls Club. And Julie has a strong background and experience in dealing with kids that need some additional support. She is a mother of 2 boys, and they're both gifted with special needs, including ADHD, dysgraphia, and speech delays, which is one of the things she's really going to talk to us about and the resources that are available to parents. So thank you, Julie, for being here with us.
We're excited about it.
So I just wanted to start by, and I want to start with Erica. I just want to know, how did you get into the field you're in? Why was it so important for you to get into social work and get into mental health resources?
Well, I've always been that person who everybody comes to with their problems, right? Whether I wanted them to or not, that was the case. That was my role for as long as I can remember, whether it's friends, family, whatever. And so once I got into college, I just like helping people. I really like helping people. And then I discovered how much your mental state affects everything else in your life, right? Like if you don't think right or you don't feel okay emotionally, then it affects everything. And so it was an easy fit for me. I feel like I said, I feel like I've been doing it before school, and now I get to do it every day, and I love it. So that's kind of what got me into the field.
And can you talk a little bit about the age groups that you focus on?
Okay, so currently I focus on 13 and up. Right, but previously I worked with kids as young as 4 or 5 years old, wow. From that pre-K3 classroom all the way up. And so it's some challenges, right? Because the 3 and 4 year olds, they need a lot of different interventions as far as learning what their feelings are, right? And how to communicate them without, throwing things and hitting people and all these different things. And of course they're getting used to just going to school and what that looks like. But of course, even some adults don't recognize that even things from their childhood are still affecting them today. So you can see the whole spectrum.
Wow. Yeah. You're very true. And as you were talking about kids being very young and still learning about their feelings and emotions, it made me think about, even with you, Julie, kind of transitioning into your story, the experience when you had with your children, they were very young as well. Do you mind sharing that?
No, absolutely. So my oldest child is 11 now and was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety when he was 6, going into first grade. And so for him, like, it kind of clarified all the things that we just thought were more difficult. And my assumption with kids with ADHD was always like, oh, it's the one that's running in circles, they can't sit still. Really, the spectrum of how every child exhibits symptoms of that are completely different. Mine would be in his own head, and I would say, oh, he can't possibly have ADHD because he can spend hours building Legos. And when we filled out the paperwork to like start doing the evaluations, they're like, yeah, that's one giant red flag, like, because they can hyperfixate. So there were just, as we went through the process, it was amazingly clear how a lot of those things happened. And then as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking in the back of my head of my own childhood going, yeah, so they said it was genetic, and I'm now seeing all of these other things from my childhood that I was like, yeah, so probably have ADHD too. Probably should deal with that. And so that part, as it became more and more apparent to us, it became easier for him to relate to me, for me to deal with my challenges, and for him to deal with his, and then be open about it. And that's been probably the biggest difference in how we handle it versus others, is like, we don't hide it. We talk about it openly. We make sure his friends are aware of it. And what I found is the empathy his friends show for it when they understand is huge. Like, and that piece has been great for him too.
I'm actually glad that you talked about not hiding it. And that's a question I have for both of you, because there's such a stigma behind needing, mental health services, or even having, a learning disability, or having dyslexia or things like that. So can you talk about, how do we as a community, not just for children, even for the adults who are undiagnosed with things, how do we break down and address those stigmas that they may have?
For one, it starts with education for me. I think that's my biggest piece, is making sure that the community understands, like, the difference between mental illness and mental health, right? Like, so we all have mental health that we need to take care of, just like we take care of our physical health and everything else that we do. We all have components that of life is happening to everybody, right? And so there are times where you feel sad or depressed or anxious, all these things, normal things. But when it goes beyond just, being sad or depressed for a short period of time, and it's chronic, then we may be looking into something a little bit different. And I think if we normalize it the way we do medical conditions, it would help a lot, right? Because we don't have a problem. Okay, if I have diabetes, I go take my insulin, and then I'm fine. I live a perfectly normal life. And it's the same thing with mental health. Perhaps you may need some therapy, or you may need medication in some cases, whatever the case may be, but you still live a normal life. You just do things differently. And so I think if we can normalize it, like, we all, have our different struggles. We all can do things different ways, but we just need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, and it's normal.
We go to the doctor every year, right? For physicals, for everything else, but do we go to the doctor, do we go see someone to help in our mental health?
Absolutely.
That's a great point.
Well, and that was when my son was first diagnosed, and I went to the pediatrician. I was like, I don't want to do medication. And he looked at me and he was like, cool, if I had told you he was diabetic, would you say you don't want to do insulin? No, that's ridiculous. And then he explained it, that, like, yes, there are all kinds of coping techniques that you can teach kids with ADHD and anxiety, but you can't do it while they're currently exhibiting the symptoms of ADHD and anxiety. If they can't focus long enough to learn the coping skills, you're not going to make any progress. So use the medication as a tool, add the therapy in so that they can learn the coping skills while they're focused. And that has been a big focus of ours. Like, he doesn't necessarily have to be on medication for his whole life. Maybe he does, but we can't start to give him the tools he needs to succeed unless we give him that success. And now at 11, he's real clear. Like, he goes into his every 3-month appointment, and it's like, I like how this is working. I don't like how this is working. Like, this is what I want to tweak. And, like, he's taking ownership of that, which is learning to control his own mental health.
Yeah.
How hard was it for you as a parent to accept?
Oh, extremely. Like, I was like, we're going to do medication for 2 weeks, and if it's not working, we're going to stop. And that was ridiculous because it takes a while to find the right ones, and there are some struggles. Like, but that first moment when he said to me, oh, it feels better, or he didn't fight going to school, or he succeeded in a task that he had struggled with before, then I was like, okay, this is working better for everyone. Our marriage is better because we're not fighting because the kids are adding so much stress because we're having to stay on top of them constantly. Like, their sibling relationships are better because kids with ADHD can really struggle at home. So that's different. Like, it just all kind of dovetailed. And one of the things that's crazy to me about kids, especially with and you'll probably can chime in here, is there's something called masking. And that's a term that I learned that, like, made all the difference. Is like, why my child behaves one way in public and another way at home is completely different. And so we figured out that at school he could hold it together, hold it together, hold it together, and as soon as he got to a safe place, it was lights out, totally different human being. And so helping him learn how to deal with that made our family life better, which was key for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the masking piece that a lot of parents don't really like to talk about.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, because they really think, well, why is my kid, it may even be the opposite. They're fine at home. I don't know why they do that at school. But it is about that safety piece, and where do I feel safe to be myself, where I don't feel like people are criticizing me or looking at me differently because something different is going on with me, or I'm having to do things a different way. So,
yes.
What's your advice to parents? Because I hear that, especially being in the youth development space, we hear parents say, oh, he wasn't like that at school, or, he's not like that at home. And we're like, no, when he gets to our after school program, he's bouncing off the walls. What is your advice for them to help guide them through that? Because that's a challenging situation, not just for parents, but for the other places that they're at.
Right. So the biggest piece, like I said, is that educational piece, like letting them know, like, hey, if I know some of the signs, then maybe I can help them, I can share that with them, and they can see, like, maybe my kid does fall into this category or this category. But definitely parental involvement is the biggest piece, like getting them connected where they feel like they can actually feel safe enough to say some of the things that they possibly are seeing at home as well, right? And creating those spaces where parents, kids, and whoever, the other person is, or whether it be the youth worker or whoever, can all collaborate and talk, because what people fail to realize is that kids really do have a lot to say.
Yes.
They really do. And they'll talk if you ask them.
They will.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the biggest piece.
For us, like, especially after a full day at school where they've been on all day long, like when we get in the car, you have to talk to me on the 10-minute drive home. And then it's like, go be by yourself, find something to eat, do your own thing, don't do video games, but just like decompress. And then in 30 minutes, we can come back together and figure out what we're going to do in the afternoon. But like my oldest, like, needs to go run outside, be by himself, like, be free. And if I don't, and like I'm on him, or I'm like, let's sit down, let's do homework, then it is World War III. It is the screaming, the disrespect, the slamming of doors, like, because mentally he just needs that break. And I have to remind myself, like, he needs that break. And just like when we get home from a rough day at the office, you don't necessarily want to be jumped on as soon as you walk in the door.
Very true.
Kids are the same, and I don't think we always attribute the way we feel to them that they deserve the same respect.
Yeah, and just helping them to figure out, like, what's their norm, what's their routine, right? Because again, they don't always have the verbiage to tell you, I need a break when I come in, right?
Yes.
So if that's what we're expecting, we're never going to get that. But what we can notice is, like, I notice this happens when you get home. Tell me how you're feeling with it. Would this help you? And then try to implement those things. Because when we ask them questions, they definitely can answer them, but they're not able to process it in a point where they can just say, like, I just need 10 minutes when I get home from school, or we're not there yet. So we're having to observe the behavior and then ask them if certain things would help them. And most of the time they're pretty open to telling you what that is.
Yeah. So parents need to exercise, parents, workers, anybody that interacts with kids, sometimes we need to exercise a bit of patience because they're still learning themselves and learning how to communicate. In this work, we deal with kids from all types of spaces and all types of challenges, successes. And one of the things that comes up often, are behavioral issues. And just in my experience at Boys and Girls Club, I found that many kids that are having behavioral issues, there's actually something else going on. And that's just a product. The misbehaving, as people say, is a product of something else. So can you talk about, like, the warning signs, even in kids, or things people should look for when maybe we think a child is misbehaving, but it may be that they need some services, or even, a child is misbehaving and they're struggling in school because they have a learning disability that's undiagnosed?
It starts with, like I said, observation. And the observation is, I want to see what happened before the behavior. We always see the behavior, or they're yelling, they're screaming, they're doing whatever, but something happened before, right? And so sometimes just asking them, what happened right before you got angry? And they can explain to you. Oftentimes it's rooted in, like, them feeling misunderstood, or nobody heard them, or they could have developed this identity because everybody thinks they're the bad kid, so they're going to be the bad kid, right? Those types of things, acting out to get attention, it's always a root. You're absolutely right. The behavior is just a manifestation of their thought process. And whatever they are thinking in that moment, that's what prompts them to then act the way that they, are acting in the moment that we see it. So definitely paying attention to what's happening before, asking those questions to kind of see what led up to it, because it's normally not just random like we think it is.
Yeah. And when it comes to school, oftentimes the kids that are misbehaving are the ones that are struggling with learning in some way. Right. And so, with my youngest child, we're looking to have him evaluated for learning disabilities. And one of the things that we found, it was, he won't complete this assignment. He goes off and does his own thing. He finds a book. He's not sitting down to complete it. And finally sitting down with both him and the teacher was always writing assignments. Okay. Why don't you want to sit down and write the assignments? Well, because it hurts when I write, because it's painful, because I'm no good at it. Okay, so if you're excelling in school in other areas, but this is a struggle, then that's something we can stop and look at and, dive deeper into and figure out, do you need some accommodations? Do you need to be tested for learning disability? But figuring out why that's so hard, because it doesn't have to be, is key. And then once we kind of started to resolve that and we took the pressure off the writing, then some of the behavioral things stopped, because they weren't really the behaviors, they were an output of the struggles that he was having.
Yeah, probably acting out so that he didn't have to write.
Correct.
If you kick me out, then I don't have to write today. Right? So,
yep. Yeah. The term at our school is uninvited guest. I'm like, cool. He was an uninvited guest from the writing assignment. Problem solved. Yeah. That's not the solution that we need.
What are some ways that parents can support their kids through these type of challenging situations? That's part A of the question. Part B is, what should we be looking for? If I were a parent, what are the warning signs that I may need to get some support services for my child?
I would say the number one thing to be looking for, of course, is the behaviors, right? Am I seeing any type of behaviors or getting reports of behaviors at school that perhaps are impeding their ability to learn, right? Teachers are a great asset. And I think if we start with being connected with the teachers, developing that relationship with the teachers, you can find out a lot. Think about it. They're really spending the majority of their time at school, not with the parent, right? So you really need the insight and the connection with that other person to kind of hear what is going on first. And then keeping their lines of communication open. Kids, like I said, they have a lot to say if people listen, right? And so asking them, having time where you can sit down and talk to them about how their day was, what was challenging about their day, and not freaking out when they tell you what it is, right? Because, again, your reaction is going to determine how much they're going to talk. If I tell you something and now you're mad at me, I'm not going to talk anymore, right? But if I tell you something that we can have a dialogue about it and you can help me with it, now we can keep that open discussion. And again, kids typically are open books. I can typically find out more in 5 minutes with a kid than the parent who lives with them, because I'm only there to listen. Parents are there they're getting mad or getting dismissed, all these other things that are associated with them just being honest.
So for me, the first one is when the teacher calls and says your kid's misbehaving. The first gut emotion is always embarrassment. How on earth did I raise it? This is a reflection of me, right? This is the one job I have, and it goes out in the world, and everyone judges me based on how this one job that I did. And so parenting, you have to set the embarrassment aside and be okay, so this isn't about me, shocking, it's about them. And so once you put that aside and realize that, your child's behavior is not a reflection of just you, it's a reflection of everything else around them and them themselves, then that makes it a little bit easier to handle the feedback and have an open dialogue. And the second piece is I always ask, can we talk to the others? So maybe you and the primary teacher aren't clicking for whatever reason, but your child interacts with a lot of people at school. So it's great to be could we, maybe they love music. Can we have the music teacher come in and talk too? Because maybe they're exhibiting different behaviors there, and you can kind of piece together, or if they're having the same challenges across the board, then that tells a different story. So pulling in all the people that interact with your child helps a ton. And as a parent, you have the right to do that. And I think sometimes we forget with public schools what our rights as parents are. And so that's a piece too, that you can sit down and say, I want to have a meeting, and this is who I want to talk to, and I'd like to set time to do this. Don't try and do it at field day. Don't try and do it at open house, but calmly sit down and ask for that. And 90% of schools are going to stop and do what they can because they want to make their jobs easier. And when the kids are doing well, that's their sole goal of being there.
And one common misconception I always hear is, as kids get older, we think they need less interaction and less supervision, right? Our teens, it's fine if they come home and go in their room and close the door, but that's maybe a sign, right? They don't want to interact. They're isolating themselves. Yeah. Cutting can be a big thing. I need to see, I see a lot of teenagers, especially in summertime, wearing hoodies, right? It's 100 plus degrees in Texas, right? So you need to be like paying attention to those types of signs with your kids, especially the older ones. What they're doing on their cell phones. I know they don't want to hear it, but what they're doing on their cell phones, just being in touch with them, and don't think because they're older they need less supervision. They actually need just as much supervision as the younger ones. It just looks different.
Yeah. That's a good point. A lot of people feel like if they are asking their teenager questions or looking at the phone that they're being nosy, but parenting doesn't stop when they turn 13, you know.
It doesn't. And everything you need to know is in that phone. I promise you.
For ssure.
Everything. Everything is in the phone.
For sure.
Yeah. You just got to find the app that they're hiding it in, right?
Exactly. Well,
You need all the passwords.
Yeah.
100%. Well, and keeping it out of their private spaces, right? So one of the things that I think is a huge challenge now with social media and stuff, like before, if I was being bullied or picked upon, I got to go home and it went away. And now it's there and on my phone and 24/7. So if it can be simple rules, like don't let your child have their phone in their room at night, take it out, keep it away. They at least get 8 or 7 hours uninterrupted in a safe space without that constant like influence of communication. It's going to give them some time to just like walk away.
Erica, you know, I was thinking about how you worked in the school district, you know, before you started your own consulting service, and Julie, you do a lot of work with the schools now. Yes. Do you see campus personnel, you know, helping or refer students that they feel have mental health, that need mental health services, or that, you know, maybe need to get tested, or, you know, need additional support? Are you all seeing that, or, you know, schools really?
So I work in several different schools, and I'll be honest, I don't think teachers are equipped to recognize the signs. Okay. And so I would say more professional development opportunities need to be done so they can learn the signs, right? Because everything is not just behavior, send them to the principal office. Sometimes there are deeper things, but I honestly don't think, you know, that wasn't a part of their schooling. So that somebody needs to teach them, you know, what to look for, right? And then I think that would help them identify more. But you do have some people who recognize it because of their own kids and their own personal experiences, and they will definitely advocate for the kids. And more now than ever before, school districts are hiring mental health professionals to be within those schools, which I think is a great thing. 12 years ago when I started, like, it was pretty much only Dallas ISD that did it. And now just about every school district has mental health professionals that will come out and evaluate and things like that. And so I'm happy to see like the direction that is moving. But the biggest piece is educating the staff that, you know, on what to look for, because they don't know. And rightfully so. They're teaching their subject, right? But they need to be able to see some of the behavioral and mental health side of things that are happening too.
And I think particularly teachers that came out like less than the last handful, 5 or 6 years, were told like ADHD, anxiety, those are medical diagnoses. You're not doctors. You're not qualified to make a medical diagnosis. So, you know, when we were trying to figure it out with my son, I would hear all these things and I'd be like, was there something going on? Is it an attention issue? It's like, well, we're not medical doctors. I'm like, right, but this is my first kid, so I don't know if this is normal or not. And it wasn't until a gifted and talented teacher pulled me aside and was like, you need to go have him tested. I was like, cool. You gave me the marching path. Now I'm going to go down it and figure it out. But I needed someone to tell me that. Right. So some of it is also being open to that and asking the questions. Do you think there's a problem? Do I need to go do something about it? Because for every one parent that asks, there are a whole bunch that when they're told something's, you know, your kid did this right. Well, what did you do? And so teachers put their guard up because they don't know which parent you're going to be. So if you have this gut feeling, then open it up and say, I think there's a problem. Do you see it? That way that they know that you're open to their feedback. And you're not going to be the parent that's like, well, what did you do? Because nobody wants to interact with somebody who's responding to them like that.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
And that goes back to the normalizing piece, right? And just making it known that, you know, I'm happy to see like so many celebrities like speaking out about their challenges just to show people that you can still be successful with ADHD or anxiety or depression or whatever. You can still be successful. So if I figure out what's going on with my child, it's not going to hinder them. If anything, now I can put the tools in place to help them to be more successful with what they need in place.
Well, and the term that we were exposed to was twice exceptional. And that's the way that like my kids, I would define my kids, right? So they may be really bright and gifted in one space, but that doesn't mean that they don't have equal deficits in the other. And oftentimes those go hand in hand. So once we were able to kind of break down and figure it out, like oh, okay, you can have both, then we were able to better serve them, and their behavior got better, and things across the board got better. And so accepting that they can have both at the same time and still succeed is a really important piece as a parent to know, like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's a big.
I think one of the challenges, that is out there, or why maybe some people don't speak up about it, and not just even kids, because there are tons of adults that are diagnosed with things, even ADHD or, dyslexia, when they're adults, autism, you hear about, especially among celebrities, you hear about it all the time, is some terms are thrown out and people are self-diagnosing. Oh, they'll say, like, my child is bad, so he has ADHD, or, this person is sad, so they must be depressed. And so let's talk a little bit about kind of the misinformation that's out there. And how do we, combat that, like, so that people are truly not self-diagnosing themselves and really going to seek professional help?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, the difference between mental health and a mental illness, right? So mental health, all of us have had anxiety at some point. In fact, it's really called like our fight or flight response, right? So it's there naturally. We can't get rid of it. We need it because it actually protects us from danger, right? And from different things that we are naturally afraid of, fearful of, worried about. All those things are normal. Same thing with being depressed. Well, if somebody that I love dies, I'm going to be sad, right? And probably for an extended period of time if I was close to this person. So all of these different things, I think if we understand that all of us experience them in some way. ADHD, you put me in a meeting for probably over 45 minutes, I'm bored, right? If I don't have anything to talk about, I'm probably tapping or... and again, it's on a spectrum, right? It's not that I can't focus, but after a certain period of time, you've lost me, right, on what it is you're trying to get me to pay attention to. So it's all there. We all have it in different capacities. The difference is if I need some assistance or if I can't control it to like if anxiety is ruling my life, for instance, I'm fearful of everything. It can even go so far as like I don't want to leave my house. COVID produced a lot of that, right? Yeah. So it crosses a threshold, I should say. And of course there's specifics on how to diagnose that, but it crosses a threshold where now, okay, we have to look at, do we need additional tools, whether that be medication or otherwise, to help you to deal with what you're feeling on a normal basis, right? And that's where it crosses that threshold, but everybody has it. That's just the piece that we have to make sure people understand. Like if I have it to a reaction to a normal event, okay, cool. But if I just can't function or it's just lingering for an extended period of time, let's go get it checked out and just make sure that I'm okay.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of like, oh, well, now all the kids are being diagnosed with this, and everyone, like, so there are a couple things. One, I think there are a whole lot of kids, if we look back on our childhood, that could have benefited by far from these kinds of services, and we can probably think in our heads to the kids in our classroom that we, now could look at and say needed special services. And two, I think COVID did a lot. I think the world our kids are growing up in is really different. And I think about like from the time, my 11-year-old struggles with some anxiety stuff and it's been ramped up lately and I've been getting frustrated with it because I'm like, come on, can we not move past with this? And someone explained to me yesterday, actually, like from the time, these kids were 7 and 8, they've been told the world is a scary place. They've been told that there's a disease out to kill them, that they practice for armed gunmen. Like these kids from the time they were little have been told the world is scary. And so we're going to have to teach them to cope with that in a different way because that's really different than what we experienced. And I hear from my older parents, well, yeah, but we processed the Cuban Missile Crisis, like, right? We did duck and cover. I'm like, cool. There is a huge world of difference from this very far, far away fear to somebody is going to be in my school, someone is going to be sick and get me sick, someone is going to bring a gun into my school, right? Those fears are so much closer to them than they ever were when we were kids. And that's changing who they are.
Yeah, and then the social media piece and the news outlet.
That too.
They see visually, visually they see things we never saw. Yes. Right, and so that piece, and they're carrying that in their pocket all the time. It's something, right? And so just like you spoke to the bullying and things like that are going on, that's a completely different component that most parents, social media wasn't around.
No.
When so you were doing things and it didn't matter what anybody thought about it or who liked it or any of these things, we didn't see it as
yes,
much.
You didn't get invited to the birthday party. Maybe someone might have mentioned that there was a party and you got the like, oh, I'm sad. You didn't have to look at a picture of everyone having fun together except for you.
Yeah.
And like, sometimes I have that, like, as an adult, I'll be like, oh, I wanted to be invited to that. And then I have to think in my head, now hang on a second. If I were planning an event, would I have invited those people? No. So why am I now sad that I'm not there? But because I see them, like, I feel a sense of missing out. And it's ridiculous because I wouldn't have included them, so I shouldn't be hurt. But if I think about how our kids are processing that, that's 100 times harder than anything we ever had to face.
Everything's thrown in their face.
Absolutely.
You know, to your point, that's why, adults need mental health days, so do kids.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yes. Everything is bombarding you.
Yeah, and definitely looking at it, I mean, to some perspective, I look at it like that. Like, these are small adults, right? But they don't have the capacity to control as much in their environment as we do, right? We can say, oh, let me take a mental health day. They got to explain why they can't go to school. And, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's blown up into something that as an adult, you wouldn't have that problem, right? And so that's another component, right? They have so many things going on in their world that they cannot control. And so sometimes it comes out in their behavior, like, this is the one thing I can do on my own, right?
You asked what to look for, like, and this is probably ties to that, like, right, kids can't say, I just need a break, I don't want to go to school anymore, right? So, like, I have a headache, I have a stomach ache. So, like, for me, if I start to hear my child with anxiety, like, my stomach's really bothering me, like, okay, reality is it's probably not your stomach. So it's probably something else. That can be equally validating. So, like, we'll have the conversation, like, okay, so it's totally fine, we're not going to go to school today. Cool with that, you can stay home. Is your stomach really bothering you, or did you really just need a break? And, like, normalizing saying I need a break instead of coming up with some ailment that sends you to a $200 doctor's visit and they're completely fine because they needed a break and you're frustrated. Like, right? Like, find a way to, like, start. And once they start to realize it's okay to say that, then they start to communicate it better, and then it takes the anxiety away in some degree too.
Yeah, you both make a good point. I think a lot of times we apply our own lens of how we grew up to today's time and culture.
It's completely different.
And it's just completely
Totally
different. You know, the things that these kids and even adults now are going through are very different than what our parents and grandparents went through. So yes, people will be impacted differently by it. And, the sky was falling, the world was ending 3 years ago with COVID. And just so many people have not transition out of that. It's just still a part of us, and that fear and anxiety, and it's still there. And so, how do we help people move past that?
And just validating their experiences, right? Because you're right, just because it wasn't that big of a deal to me doesn't mean it's not that big of a deal to you. But a lot of times adults can really speak to children that way. And so you're a teenager. Like, what do you have to worry about? What do you have to stress about?
You don't pay any bills.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Your stressors are different, but that doesn't mean I'm not stressed, right? At 13, 14, 15, whatever it is, right? It's just different. And so learning to see things from their perspective and not minimizing it as though it's not that big of a deal because you dealt with something worse when you were that age. Again, we're two different people. We deal with things different ways. But they really just want that validating, experience to say, like, I can be honest and say, like, this is stressful to me. This is something I'm struggling with, and not be seen as weak because you didn't do it that way.
That applies in the school and education setting, too. Like, we minimize kids' experiences at school. Like, you should go to school every day. You should be fine. Just go and do your schoolwork. But there are so many other things.
So many other things. And the schools are doing a much better job, I would say, of, like, incorporating social and emotional learning. I will say about the things that I think COVID brought out was the need to bring that social and emotional learning into the school district and make it part of their regular routine conversations so that they can talk about that, so they can, experience that and they can work through that. Because what we forget is, like, while we may say, oh, my kid's 8, right? COVID was only for 2 years of their life. Well, how many of us remember anything before we were 6, right? Like, those years don't really count because they don't remember them. So the only thing they remember is this. And so that changes how I think about their lives in a big way. But the part that the schools can do differently, we as parents need to remember, is that the schools do have an obligation to provide some of these services. And so you have to be a little bit forceful and a little bit, determined to go out and get them for your child. And so continuing to be the squeaky wheel about it is important. None of it came easy. My kids go to a great school district. I volunteer at the school, but I still have to work really hard to push for what my kids need from special services. And I still have to know what special services they're obligated to have. And I still sometimes have to pull in their therapist or counselor into the school to say, we need these services and this is why. And so I would encourage people to like remember that. And if you don't know about that, like find some resources that can help you know what your kids' rights are in their school.
So are these services free, like the services you're talking about? And I know that you're going to be having a program launching for that, Julie, and even Erica. Is it expensive? You know, some people say I can't afford it. Are there low cost or affordable, you know, services that people can access?
Well, there are. In terms of mental health, I'll speak to that side. I'll let you kind of speak to what free services are in the school. But as far as mental health, there are tons of different agencies out here within the county, within the community that offer free services. A lot of kids are on Medicaid. Medicaid actually pays for mental health services. So you can even find clinicians that are in network with, you know, Medicaid services to provide those counseling services as well. So, and again, like I said, schools are putting a lot of mental health professionals in the schools now. And so really talking about how do I get my kid connected with them. I know, you know, at one point I had 7 different campuses, and the same thing I do now in the private sector, I was doing that for the school, right? And so it's just a matter of getting a referral and you know, parental consent and things like that, but they can still get some of those things in schools. And most schools, well, school counselors for sure, will have a list of providers that service kids.
I would for sure say start with your school counselor because they're going to have the list of resources. And I think they're an underutilized resource for parents, right? Like, I don't think a lot of parents realize you can pick up the phone and call your child's school counselor and say, hey, my kid's going through a really rough time. This is what we're seeing at home, and I need you guys at school to be on the lookout for it and help us with that. And you can ask them to do that, and that's part of what they should be doing. And if you're not getting a ton of luck there, then feel free to go, you know, to the child's principal and saying, hey, I'm coming to the school and I'm needing these resources, and I need you guys to provide them. And when it comes to the learning disabilities, the schools are obligated if, you know, they're seeing deficits in their classwork and you ask to test. So you can say, I want to see my child tested for these things. And you can really push the schools to do that. And once they start that testing process, there are some very specific timelines that they need to follow, and there are some very specific services that they need to provide, and they're all free. And so they get federal grant money. You'll hear the term 504s thrown around, right? And that's the act that protects kids with special needs to make sure that they have equitable access to education. And that's kind of what does that mean? That means that they're served in the classrooms with whatever extra resources they need. And the other thing is, if you're concerned about your child having a learning disability, you think maybe there's something off, Scottish Rite is a huge one. So they're one of the world's most out there resources for special education needs, like dyslexia, dysgraphia, and they're completely free. And so you can get the paperwork from your pediatrician, you can fill it out, and their services are completely free when you go in. And so they're a great resource, and they can help spell out everything that you need, and you can take that paperwork to your child's school district. Most of them in this area are incredibly familiar with them, and they're going to be able to help follow the path that they set out. And so they're definitely available. It's just sometimes a little bit hard to know where to look.
In your experience, how have you seen families, because this conversation is more than just about, you know, the impact on kids. You know, we know that these issues are experienced by as adults as well. So have you seen when kids or even just mental health illnesses or, you know, services need, or even, you know, the learning disabilities, how are the family impacted? And if you have any advice for families on how to support each other when maybe 1 or 2 people in the family are going through something?
The family is definitely impacted, especially when they're all under the same roof, because it affects everything about that particular person, whether it's how they interact with each other, different things that you're seeing in their behavior, and just giving the family a space to talk about it. I love what she's saying about how, you know, they talk about it, they're open about it, so we can communicate and understand how I can help you as your sister, as your brother, as your mom, you know, so that I can understand what's going on with you. A lot of times when you throw out a diagnosis like depression, people don't know what that looks like other than, oh, they just don't want to get up, right? They just want to sleep all day. But they don't really know how to support them, you know? And so including them on the process as they're learning more about what depression means for them, including the family in that, so they can understand how to support. And that's the biggest piece.
Do you do joint sessions with the family?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I mean, my oldest, you know, had sometimes on the ADHD spectrum will explode, right? Like the tantrums that nobody else sees but us, but like the throwing things, slamming of doors, right? And that affects my youngest child. And so part of it is explaining to him, like, no, these behaviors aren't okay. We make sure we don't normalize them for him. And then he develops an incredible sense of compassion. My son's having a really hard time. He'll sometimes bring him a pillow to throw, or he'll bring him his stuffed bear to calm him down, right? So like they interact too, but like then you also have to realize that it is affecting the other kids, and then make sure that you find balances to that. And that can be really hard.
Yeah, and even just allowing everyone in the family. That's why I'm an advocate for everybody having therapy, because you need a space to kind of talk about some of those feelings that you have. Like
even
maybe
that,
yes,
yeah,
even that,
exactly.
right? Like it's frustrating to me that perhaps this particular person in my family is getting more attention from
Yep.
mom or dad because of what they're going through, and sometimes I feel left out. So they need a space to be able to talk about those kinds of things so that they can get some coping skills for what's going on around them. Right.
Well, and the other thing we're big into, at least in our house, and we're trying, is like to normalize that sometimes you go to a therapist and sometimes you don't. So like we just started my son back up with somebody, actually today was his first session, believe it or not, with a new therapist. And like the conversation I had, he's like, I don't want to do this. I'm like, cool, we're going to go for 8 weeks and maybe we won't need it after those 8 weeks. And that's fine. Maybe we'll take a break over the summer and we'll come back. But like we're going to normalize that sometimes we need it and sometimes we don't. Mm-hmm. He's going to middle school, and so I anticipate that being a particularly stressful environment. So now in May, I'm trying to make sure that come August, when he really gets stressed, we've already laid the groundwork. Mm-hmm. That like maybe we need to go back and talk to, Dr. Kate and have that already there. Mm-hmm. And so just making that it's not, that it's normal.
That's a good thing, having it already there. Right?
Exactly.
It's being proactive, right? And this is like you said, we go to the doctor every year, we go to the dentist sometimes twice a year, every 6 months. Go ahead and get a therapist on your roster, right? So you develop that relationship so that when things happen, because like I say, life is happening to everybody. You don't have to find, it takes you 6-8 weeks to find someone. You already have someone that you're connected with that you can call and schedule with when you need it.
Well, and what's always amazing to me is like whenever we do it and we get to that place or we change the medication, because man alive, like with ADHD, those medications need tweaked constantly. And so like you feel like you're always fiddling it. But as soon as I tell people, this is the like worst parenting problem, right? Like usually I find myself increasing yelling at my child, and then I get to the point I'm like, right, I've been yelling at you for 2 solid weeks. Let's go back to the doctor. Let's tweak your medications. And then things get better. And I'm like, right, I do this 2 weeks too late every single time and I don't learn. But like trying to just remember that like it's an ongoing process, and don't wait till you're in crisis to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Like try and get ahead of it. Like it is a huge piece. Yeah.
What are the crisis warning signs? That's a good point. A lot of people wait until crisis is here. Mm-hmm. Falling apart.
Yeah. And some of the crisis warning signs, you're exhausted. You feel burnt out. You don't want to go. And I'm just talking from the adult perspective.
Yeah.
You don't want to go to work anymore. You used to enjoy it. Now you don't. Things that you used to enjoy doing with your friends, you no longer enjoy doing it. You want to stay in the house. Everything is irritant. You find yourself more irritable. You have an attitude more. All of these things, it's just slowly building up. Right, slowly building up. And then life issues too. That's why I put on there like phases of life issues. Sometimes you lose a job or you lose a loved one. You have a medical condition. All of these things are happening all at once, and you literally just feel exhausted. Like, I don't know what to do. I have so much on my plate. That's signs that it's building up, and then you eventually probably get to the point where I just don't want to do anything.
I think adults, we talk ourselves out of it being a real thing, right? Mm-hmm. We say, oh, I'm just tired. I've been working long hours. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go out. Again, I'm tired. I just don't want to be around anybody right now. So what's your advice to the adults? Like, don't
wait. And definitely be proactive. I always say therapy is the one place in the world that you can talk and say, like, honestly how you feel. And you don't have to worry about it, like, following you after the fact, right? If you talk to your best friend, they'll listen, but they care about you. So they're probably going to give you their feedback. They're probably going to check on you. They're probably going to tell you something that you probably don't want to hear. All of that type of dynamic, because they care. They have a close relationship with you. You can literally kind of dump it in therapy and get that response that you need, but you can leave it there in the office, right? And then you can go on with your life. And so to me, it just definitely gives people that outlet to be able to talk about how they're honestly feeling. Because again, life is hard. It's happening to everybody, right? We all have things that are going on and going wrong in our lives all the time. But we do kind of tell ourselves, oh, we're fine, we'll shake it off, we'll just keep going, we'll keep going. But we're human, right? We're human. And we need to figure out ways to cope with what is going on, especially the things that we cannot control.
Yeah, I would say if you're parenting your kids and you feel like something's not the same as everybody else and you just keep putting in the back of my head, oh, well, I'm doing something wrong, or oh, I'm not doing something right, then that's probably the sign that you need to stop and look for help. Like, because it's not just on you. It's not just how you are doing it, right? Like, that's a sign to kind of take a step and be like, okay, this isn't just me being bad at this. Like, this may be that we need more resources. And hey, maybe you find a therapist for your child, or maybe you have them tested and nothing's wrong, and you say, cool, then I need some parenting help. Like, that's okay too. Like, that's completely fine.
Because you're never by yourself.
Yeah.
Ever. Like, there's always somebody else that is going through it or has been through it and made it through, that you just need to kind of get it out there so you can figure out what's going on.
I think that's a good place to sit for a little bit. I think people often feel that it's just them.
Yeah.
Right? It's only my child going through this. I'm the only person feeling this way. And so I would love to have some more dialogue about that, feeling isolated and I'm the only person experiencing this.
Right. So I always just think nothing's new under the sun.
It's true.
Nothing is new. And like she said, she just kind of mentioned, like, there were several people growing up that probably you knew had ADHD, or now that you know, right, you can look back and say, oh, they could have benefited from these different things. But again, nobody was talking about it. And so now letting people know, kind of what's going on, and then getting that support, because they may be experiencing the same things too. Like, isolation is how we stay stagnant. That's the only way we grow, is to dialogue with people, get different perspectives, hear different things that are going on and how other people are coping with whatever it is that they're going through. And it helps. That's why support groups are so great, right? Because now I can be in a room with 10 other people who are going through a similar thing, and we can all kind of talk about how we're going to overcome it, right?
I think when you're more open about it, like, hey, I'm really struggling with my child's behavior, like, anyone else, like, you're going to find that people are like, yeah, me too, right? Like, once you start talking about it, then you're going to find that circle that you're looking for, because others are going to respond to that. And they're going to be like, yeah, okay, me too, right? Like, and then you kind of find that group of people that you can go to and talk about. And, like, that helps because you build your own community. But as long as you're keeping it quiet and you're not talking about it with anybody else, then you're not discovering who else is in similar boats as you are.
Yeah, so most of the time people are trained and conditioned to show up as though they're okay. Mm-hmm. And you're always okay, so people don't really know what's going on with you. So there's a ton of people who are willing to help you most of the time in your circle, whether that's people from work to friends to family. But again, we have to let them know that we need help. If you always act like you're okay, nobody's thinking anything different other than what you're presenting. So again, like she was saying, just being open in terms of saying, like, hey, I'm just not okay today. How are you doing today? It's not a good day for me, right? Start there, like, just being honest with, instead of just saying I'm fine, like, start there with it's not a good day for me. And then that opens the door for somebody to actually ask you, well, what's going on? And you'd be surprised sometimes they're like, oh, I dealt with that last year, right? Or I went through that before. And now you can start to get some dialogue on how to better help yourself, whether it's through therapy or just even through that conversation. Like, how can I get better in this particular area?
Well, and I would say when it comes to your kids, the same thing. Be open and honest. Like, you've been having a rough night at home. They've been throwing pillows and throwing tantrums. When you don't drop them off at school with, like, a good luck, like, send a note to the staff, send a note to the teacher, call the Boys and Girls Club and say, hey, my kid had a really rough night last night. This is what we're struggling with. Can you let me know how they're doing throughout the day? Like, and it makes other people aware that they're struggling so that they can respond to them differently. And then once they're being a little more patient, a little more compassionate, your child's going to feel that, and it's just going to kind of open the door both ways. Plus, they're going to appreciate the heads up versus getting surprised with whatever was going on for the day.
That's a bit of vulnerability, though, right?
It is.
We struggle.
We do.
being vulnerable and telling people I need help.
It's a lot of unlearning, and I can definitely say from just in African American culture specifically, we have to unlearn that we don't have to be so strong all the time. And most of the time, the strength is found in our weakness, right? The fact that I can say I'm not okay today, that's where your strength lies, not just acting like everything is okay and suffering in silence, right? But we have to unlearn that. And so I think a lot of that is really, coming to conversations like this, listening to things like this, and just kind of retraining yourself to understand that perhaps the way that grandma did it and mama did it is not the way that is going to be best for me. And giving it a shot to try something new, right? Because the only way you're going to get a new result is to try something new.
Was it best for them, though? We think about, how our parents and how they did it in some instances, and they're still struggling and dealing with a lot of those issues now. You see a lot of older people going to counseling because they have unresolved issues in their life, and we're holding on to that. And it's like, why?
A lot of times our identity is really wrapped into our ability to be strong, right? Like the fact that I went through all these different things, that makes me strong, and everybody knows me as the strong person, so that's who I have to be. No different than the child who everybody says they're bad, so that's who they have to be, right? And so a lot of times the not getting help or not making changes is really just about, you don't want to seem like you're not what everybody thinks you are, right? Like everybody thinks you're strong, and if I get help, now all of a sudden I'm not that anymore. So who am I really, right? But that's when we attach our identity to stuff that really we should be getting help with, right? Because you're good by yourself. All these other things that you've pulled and these experiences to make you into this person are really just pulling away at you. Yeah.
We definitely have a lot that we need to address. This is such a good topic because I think it hits so many different demographics of people. It crosses all types of lines. It's just something that we're all exposed to. What is something that you both from your different areas of expertise want to make sure that everyone who's watching the community conversations today, that they leave with knowing this?
I would say that whatever you're going through, you're not the only one going through it. Like whenever I, my straight A, like kid that everyone looks at and like he's got it together, and I'm like, yeah, except for at home when he melts down and loses it, and we spend hours convincing him to go to a play date. Like, you're not alone. Like, you're not the only one going through it. Like, behind closed doors, there's a whole lot of people going through exactly what you're going through. So like, don't hide it. The best thing you can do is to embrace that you need help, reach out. Even if you could find one person in your child's school or in your child's life to talk to about it, it's going to take that like emotional burden off of you so much. And then you're going to find that when you have an outlet for it, you're a more patient person, and you're a more patient parent, and you're a better parent because of it. And so your child's going to benefit from that. And so I think if you frame things up with like, this is really what's best for them, is for me to get help with it, it makes it a little bit easier.
I would say it's okay to take your cape off. It is okay to take your cape off.
You sound like me, Erica.
Just normalize the fact that we don't have to do everything and be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? It is okay to not be okay. It's okay that if I can't show up for this other person today, if I can't do these things that they're asking me to do, like, it's okay. I'm human, right? Because so many times we just take on so much stuff, and that's really the root of our stress, our anxiety, all these things, is that we're not just taking care of us. We're trying to make sure everybody else is doing well. We're trying to manage everyone else's opinion of us. We're trying to do all these different things at the same time when we just can't. We can't. So take the cape off and understand, like, I'm human. Today, this is what I can do, right? And if today you can only give 30% and you give that 30%, then you've done the best that you can. But it's not always going to be that you can be everything for everybody and do everything. You have to learn how to rest. You have to learn how to take care of yourself. And you have to learn how to say no. Yeah.
Man, take your cape off. I love it.
I like that phrase.
If you ladies can share how people can get in contact with you, I want to make sure that, if there are resources you want to share, we'll put it on our community conversations page. But we want to make sure that anyone watching can access this great information, and you all if they need support services.
Yeah. So tailor-made counseling, we do virtual counseling. It's myself, and we have 3 different associates with us now. And so you can access us. We're on Facebook, Tailor-Made Child and Family Services. We're on Instagram, Tailor-Made Child and Family Services. We have a website, www.tailormadecfs.org. And so any of those resources, you can reach us, you can contact us. If you go on the website, of course, there's a number for you to call, or you can email us. We do accept insurance, and we'd be happy to help.
It's awesome.
And you can reach out to me personally. My email is Julie, Julie, .Jennings, JENNINGS @gmail. And like, I'd love to just chat. Like, if you just need a parent to chat with, like, happy to. Like, anytime. I have 2 kids, a 7 and 11-year-old boys. So a handful.
Well, I thank you both for being here. This was a great conversation. We could go all night, but I know we have other things to do. But we thank everyone for joining us for today's community conversations. This has been a life-changing, eye-opening conversation. We've learned that it's okay to take our capes off, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say when we need support and when we need help. And the first thing, the main thing that you have to do is take care of yourself and take care of your children. So do not be afraid to access all of the resources that these amazing ladies have talked about. We'll have them on our Community Conversations page, so please visit bgcdallas.org to find out more about what we're doing, the next topics on the conversations. We will see everybody next month. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a great evening.